It all started with a simple visit. My son, Brandon, had always been close to his best friend, Jake. They had known each other since high school, and even as young men in their early 20s, they were inseparable. Jake had practically grown up in our home, crashing on our couch, eating dinner with us, and joking around like he was part of the family. But something had changed. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman to betray my vows. For over 20 years, I had been a faithful wife, a devoted mother, and a woman who believed in love, even when passion faded. But life has a cruel way of exposing desires you never knew existed, desires so strong they take control of you before you can even think to stop them. The scrawny teenage boy I once knew had transformed into a man, tall, broad-shouldered, muscles stretching against the fabric of his shirts in ways that made it impossible not to notice. I had seen him grow, but I had never really seen him. Not until now. It was a warm summer afternoon when it happened. Brandon had invited Jake over for a weekend gaming marathon. As always, they lounged in the living room, controllers in hand, shouting at the screen while I prepared snacks in the kitchen. "Mrs. Carter, you spoil us," Jake said, flashing me a grin as I set down a plate of sandwiches. His voice was deeper now, more confident. I laughed, shaking my head. "Someone has to make sure you two eat real food." As I turned to walk away, I felt it, his eyes lingering on me. It was subtle, but I noticed. I told myself I was imagining things. He was just being polite, just a young man who saw me as nothing more than Brandon's mom. But that night, as I lay in bed beside my sleeping husband, I couldn't get that look out of my mind. The next morning, Brandon had to step out for an errand, leaving Jake alone in the house with me. I was in the laundry room folding clothes when I heard footsteps behind me. "Need some help?" I turned to find Jake standing in the doorway, his large frame nearly filling the space. He wasn't wearing a shirt, just basketball shorts hanging low on his hips, revealing his sculpted abs, his broad chest. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep my eyes on his face. "I got it," I said quickly, feeling warmth rise to my cheeks. He stepped closer, picking up one of Brandon's shirts from the pile. "You take care of everyone, huh?" His voice was softer now, almost intimate. I laughed nervously. "That's what moms do." "But you're not just a mom," he murmured, his eyes locking onto mine. The air in the room shifted. I should have laughed it off. I should have changed the subject. But I didn't. Because for the first time in years, I felt seen. Not as a mother. Not as a wife. But as a woman. And that was the moment everything started to change. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. A fleeting moment. A harmless exchange. But I knew better. After that day in the laundry room, I couldn't stop thinking about Jake. Every time he visited, my eyes found him before I could stop myself. The way his muscles flexed when he stretched, the confidence in his stride, the deep timbre of his voice, it all ignited something inside me that I had long buried. And worst of all, I knew he noticed. One evening, Brandon invited Jake over for drinks. My husband had already gone to bed, exhausted from work, leaving just the three of us in the living room. They were laughing, taking turns playing video games, while I sat nearby, pretending to scroll through my phone. But I wasn't paying attention to the screen, I was stealing glances at Jake. He caught me once. Our eyes met, and he smirked, just barely, before returning his attention to the game. It was dangerous. I knew it was. But the rush of being noticed was intoxicating. When Brandon got up to grab another drink, Jake turned to me, his voice low. "You keep looking at me like that, Mrs. Carter, and I might start thinking you like what you see." Heat rushed to my face. "Don't be ridiculous," I whispered, glancing toward the kitchen where my son was. He leaned in slightly, his voice teasing but firm. "Then stop looking at me like that." I opened my mouth to respond, but Brandon returned before I could say anything. The moment passed, but my body was buzzing with something I hadn't felt in years, anticipation. A few days later, Brandon left for a weekend trip with friends. My husband had to work late, and I was home alone when I heard a knock at the door. It was Jake. "Brandon's not here," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I know." He stepped inside anyway, his eyes locked on mine. I should have asked him to leave. I should have told him this was wrong. But I didn't move as he walked toward me, his towering frame making me feel small in a way that made my breath hitch. "You've been thinking about it, haven't you?" he asked, his voice low. I swallowed hard. "Jake." He reached out, his fingers grazing my arm, just a simple touch, but it sent a shiver down my spine. "We can pretend all we want," he murmured, stepping closer. "But I see it in your eyes. You want this." The logical part of me screamed to stop this before it went too far. But the part of me that had been starved of passion, of excitement, of being wanted, that part was winning. I didn't step away. I didn't stop him when his fingers trailed down my arm, when his breath brushed against my ear as he whispered, "Tell me to leave, and I will." But I didn't say a word. Because deep down, I knew I didn't want him to. What happens when you step too close to the fire? Stay with me to find out. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. I should have stopped him. I should have taken a step back, told him to leave, locked the door behind him, and pretended that none of this ever happened. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, staring up at him, feeling my pulse race as his fingers traced my skin. I was trembling, but not with fear. It was something else, something I hadn't felt in years. Desire. Jake didn't rush me. He just stood there, watching, waiting, letting me make the next move. I could still walk away. I could still end this before it began. But I didn't. I reached for him. The moment my fingers brushed against his chest, everything snapped. He grabbed me, his hands firm but gentle, pulling me close. His lips crashed against mine, and I gasped at the sheer intensity of it. It wasn't soft. It wasn't careful. It was hunger. His hands moved down my back, gripping me in a way that made my breath hitch. I melted into him, letting years of restraint crumble in an instant. I shouldn't have wanted this. But I did. We barely made it to the couch before his hands were under my shirt, fingers exploring, claiming. My mind screamed at me to stop, to think about what I was doing, but my body had already made the decision. Jake wasn't hesitant. He knew exactly what he was doing, and God, I let him. I let him take control. He lifted me effortlessly, his strength sending another thrill through me. I had forgotten what it felt like to be handled like this, to be wanted with such raw, undeniable need. I gasped as he pressed me against the cushions, his body hovering over mine. His eyes burned into me, searching. "Tell me you want this," he murmured. I should have said no. I should have pushed him away. But instead, I whispered yes. And just like that, I was his. The house was silent except for our heavy breathing. I lay there, my body still tingling from what we had done. The weight of it all hadn't hit me yet. I wasn't ready for guilt. Not yet. Jake propped himself up on one elbow, his fingers trailing lazy circles on my arm. He wasn't in a rush to leave. "You okay?" he asked. I turned my head to look at him, at the man who had just shattered every rule I had lived by. "I don't know," I admitted. He smirked. "Liar." I let out a breathy laugh, but deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't okay. Because this wasn't just a mistake. It was the beginning of something I wasn't sure I could stop. Desire is a dangerous thing. Do you think she'll walk away unscathed? Let me know in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I told myself it was a mistake, a moment of weakness, that it would never happen again. But then it did. Again and again. Jake and I couldn't stop. Every stolen glance, every accidental touch, every whispered word made it harder to resist. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. The thrill of secrecy, the forbidden nature of it all, only made it more intoxicating. But with every encounter, the risk grew. One evening, I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner while my husband sat in the living room watching TV. The sound of video game gunfire came from upstairs, Brandon and Jake, just like always. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. I was stirring a pot on the stove when I felt a presence behind me. I turned, my heart jumping as I saw Jake standing in the doorway. My husband was just a few feet away, oblivious, but Jake's eyes were locked onto mine with that same hungry look that had undone me so many times before. He leaned against the counter, his voice low. "You've been ignoring me." I swallowed hard. "We can't keep doing this." He smirked. "That's not what you said last time." I exhaled sharply, forcing myself to focus on the spoon in my hand. Jake, my husband, is right there. His fingers brushed against mine. Just a light touch. A silent promise. A reminder of what we had done, what we both knew we wanted to do again. And then, before I could react, Brandon's voice rang out from the stairs. "Jake, you coming back?" I yanked my hand away, my pulse hammering. Jake grinned, his eyes flickering to my husband, then back to me. "Yeah, I'm coming." And just like that, he was gone. But the damage had already been done. The next time it happened, we were almost caught. Brandon had left to run errands, leaving Jake and me alone in the house. I told myself I wouldn't let anything happen, that I'd keep my distance. But the moment I was near him, all of my resolve crumbled. He kissed me in the hallway, pressing me against the wall, his hands possessive and demanding. I lost myself in him, my fingers tangling in his hair, his body pinning mine as we gave into the fire that wouldn't burn out. Then I heard the front door unlock. I shoved him away, panic crashing over me like a tidal wave. Jake stepped back just as Brandon walked in, completely unaware of what he had almost walked in on. Jake's breathing was heavy, his shirt wrinkled, but he recovered quickly, turning to Brandon like nothing had happened. "Hey man, you were gone forever." Brandon laughed, setting his keys down. Traffic was hell. I turned away, gripping the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. My body was still burning from Jake's touch, but my heart was hammering with something else. Fear. That night, as I lay in bed beside my husband, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. This wasn't just some reckless affair anymore. It was dangerous. I was playing with fire, and sooner or later, I was going to get burned. But the worst part? I wasn't sure if I even wanted to stop. I had crossed too many lines. Every stolen moment with Jake had been a rush, a thrilling, reckless, intoxicating. But with every encounter, the fear of being caught grew stronger. It was no longer just about the passion. It was about survival. How long could I keep this up before my world collapsed? The answer came sooner than I expected. One evening, my husband sat at the dinner table, his fork hovering over his plate. His expression was unreadable, but there was something different about him, something unsettling. "You've been distracted lately," he said suddenly. I nearly dropped my glass. "What?" He lifted his eyes to mine, searching. "You're different, distant." My heart pounded so hard I thought he could hear it. I forced a small laugh. "Work has been stressful. And, keeping up with everything around the house." He didn't look convinced. I felt Jake's presence before I saw him. He had just come downstairs, probably to grab a drink, but the moment our eyes met, something passed between us. A silent tension. A warning. Jake didn't linger. He grabbed a soda from the fridge and walked out the back door like nothing was wrong. But something was. My husband was watching me too closely. That night, my husband fell asleep early, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sat on the couch, staring at the television, though I wasn't watching. Then my phone vibrated. A message from Jake. Meet me outside. I hesitated. Everything inside me screamed that this was too risky, that I was tempting fate. But I went anyway. I stepped out into the cool night air, finding him leaning against his car, waiting. His eyes met mine, dark and intense. "This is getting too dangerous," I whispered. He smirked, stepping closer. "That's what makes it exciting." I shook my head. "I almost got caught today." Jake reached for me, his fingers brushing my arm. "And yet, you're still here." He was right. I was still here. Still addicted to this. His hands found my waist, pulling me against him, and for a moment I let myself forget everything. His lips found mine, and I melted into him, needing this one last time. Then I heard a noise. A sharp gasp. I turned, my blood running cold. Brandon stood a few feet away, his face twisted in confusion and betrayal. His best friend. His mother. "Oh my God," he whispered. I stepped forward. "Brandon, But he was already walking away, shaking his head, disbelief and disgust written all over his face. Brandon didn't speak to me for days. He moved out, crashing at a friend's place. My husband never found out the full truth, but he sensed something was wrong. The tension in our house was unbearable. And Jake? He tried to talk to me again, but I knew it was over. The thrill was gone, replaced by something else. Something ugly. Guilt. Regret. Shame. I had destroyed the one thing I swore I never would, my family. And for what? A fleeting pleasure? A secret desire? Was it worth it? Even now, I don't know the answer. But one thing is certain. There are some lines you can't uncross. And once you do, you can never go back. What will you do if you were in my shoes? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.